I hear people talking about their games, I usually hear stories about how the party is never split up. And I think that's partially because Dungeons & Dragons is often thought of as a very team-oriented game. And for that reason, well, no one ever splits up their party. However, there's a certain blandness that comes about if you always have everybody together at all times. It's like you're only seeing the team, you're never seeing the individual characters. And one way you can get the character's uniqueness to really shine is to put them in situations where they don't have each other to rely on. And so with all that in mind, I have some advice for if you're ever going to split up the adventuring party.
The easiest way to separate a party of player characters is to do something like having a few, but not all of them, fall into a pit trap that takes them to a separate floor or something. Or perhaps they're on a boat and it gets destroyed in a bad storm and they wash up on different places on the shore of an island. Or maybe they all wind up knocked out and imprisoned in different cells in different parts of a larger building. However, because all these methods are so easy to do, it also makes them really hackneyed and really cliched. So if your players find a clever workaround to a sudden separation like this, just let them have it. If this ruins some plans that you had in mind, just readapt them for later use. Sometimes you can make something bizarre happen from just a mundane encounter. A real example of this is what happened to me one time I was in a Vampire the Masquerade game. As part of character creation in Vampire the Masquerade, you roll for how much blood your character starts off with. 3 of the player characters, one of them being mine, started with only 2 blood. So before we got to the main plot of the game for that first session, I suggested to the GM that we have a few scenes where, as individuals, we feed before meeting at the Elysium. The alternatives being just ignoring that we were almost starving or just saying we uneventfully found some blood somewhere. This wound up working in the GM's favor though. It gave him more events to allude to later in the story, as well as padded out the game a little bit more, since he admitted he only had 1 event planned for that session, which went by much faster than he had anticipated when it came time to it. One of the biggest problems with splitting up the party is that you'll often wind up with players not doing anything, possibly getting bored. Even if you're good at making encounters interesting to watch, you can only grip a person's attention for so long if they've got nothing to do. This is advice I'm pulling straight from the game Tenra Bancho Zero, which is the game where I most often use this. In fact, in a game of Tenra Bancho Zero I once ran, none of the player characters met until the very end of the final scene. And my players loved every minute of that game. The secret was that I let the players control the NPCs. This worked mostly because this game was built on player conflict. 2 PCs were captains from opposing factions with different objectives in the same area. One of the other 2 player characters was the objective of one of the captains, and the final player character was just sort of caught in the middle of all this. And when it came time for the captain's underlings to be on stage, I let the players act out their actions. Before giving control to NPCs though, I explained the NPC's objectives and what the scene was, and then I just left everything else to the player. I still retained my power to veto certain things that didn't go along with what I was planning, such as one time when one of the NPCs reported that a forest spirit was now rampaging towards the city they were in. That didn't really fit in with the narrative I had in mind in the slightest, so I spoke up and said, no, that wasn't happening, and that NPC never actually said that.
Overall, the thing to keep in mind is that splitting up the party is a bit of an undertaking. It's something that requires practice, and it isn't something you should try to rely on too much or really do too quickly or too often. So just in your next game, try it maybe once or twice, and if it doesn't work, just put the idea on the metaphorical shelf for a little while, and then just come back to it later. So, with all that said, I am Aaron Dershadel, and I will see you all next time.